My name is Caleb Schlater, and I lead the product support team here at Precision Planting. Now, the title of my presentation is the easy button, and I took that from inspiration from the Staples commercials. Have you seen those? Where somebody makes a mistake and there's this huge mess and everything's in chaos, and somebody comes along with this gadget called the easy button. They hand it and they click it, and then magically everything goes back to a perfect state. And I think about that, and I think about, man, wouldn't it be nice to have that on our operation? But in reality, as farmers and as growers, we don't get the easy button on our operation. So the title of this is a little bit of a red herring, because usually when we make a mistake, when we mess something up, it's going to cost us, right? It's going to cost us dollars, it's going to cost us time, it's going to cost us sweat. So what we want to do is we want to figure out how to make something easier the first time. Well, I actually have very recently an example of where I wish I would have had an easy button. And so you'll see the service panel up on the screen. What this service panel is this was a project that my dad and I decided we were going to do, and we decided to do it on the hottest day of the year. That was probably our first mistake. But we got up at 4 a.m. because we knew it was going to be hot, so we could go out there and we could get this service panel put into the ground. And so we got out there, we had everything planned out, and like a picket fence, we measured out our spacing between the posts. We knew how deep we had to go in order to get below frost line. I started mixing the concrete. We started pouring the concrete into each of the holes. And then Dad and I picked up all 3 posts and tried to put it into the ground, just as you can see it here. Unfortunately, it didn't budge. It didn't budge. We were trying to put more weight on it. We had 2 250-pound men doing pull-ups on that bar to try and get the service panel into the ground. And the reason it wouldn't budge is because we forgot to manage a variable. There was a variable in there called instant post-set concrete. And you would think they would tell you how quickly it sets, but they didn't. So we were in trouble. We didn't have enough weight. We even brought in the old Ford backhoe to hit it down with the bucket, but we couldn't get it into the ground. We didn't have enough weight. And so we were in trouble. We had to dig 3 new holes. We had to do it all over again. So it cost us. Now in this situation, it didn't cost us a whole lot because we could redo it. But we don't have that luxury when we're in the field during planting season, do we? We want to get it done right the first time. So we have to look at all the variables, and we know that when you have all those variables, what's it do? It gets more and more complex. So now we don't have an easy button, we have more variables, there's more complexity. We as operators, what we want to do at that point is we want to break down those variables and we want to make it simple. And so I thought about that. How do I make the variability simple? Because at the end of the day, it does breed complexity. But I think there's a couple of key steps that we can do in order to make complex things simple. The first thing that I think about when it comes to variability is that I want to be able to see it. I need to see the variability in order to do anything about it or to make it simple. The next thing I want to do is I want to understand the variability. What's it telling me? What's it telling me? Because then, once I am able to see it and once I know what it's telling me, I can take action. I can make a management decision based upon that information. And so when we break things down and we want to make them easy, this is the steps that we can take as long as we have the right tools and the right knowledge to take those steps. And so during the planting season, I thought about this. I thought about, how did we get to the point where we're able to see the variability in our farms? And so I want to take you out to our field. This is Birkmeyer Farms. This is actually about 8 miles west of the Precision Planting facility. And we've been farming this ground for well over 10 years. And for us, we know the ground, right? We have assumptions on the ground, I should say. Because we wanted to get a little bit better idea of the variability within the soil. And so what do you do at that point? You overlay the soil map. And the soil map tells you you have crescent loam, you have plano silt loam, you have all these different types of soil profiles. But that didn't allow us to make a management decision when it mattered the most. It didn't allow us to make a decision in the field when we're putting that seed in, right? So we wanted to get a little bit more of a picture of the variability of our farm. And so with the help of some simple technologies, Doug talked about it, the load pens, we're able to get a better insight into what's happening in our field. We're able to get a better, high-definition, high-resolution picture of the variation in our field. And the thing that was great about when we got this image, when we were able to see the variation, and it confirms some of our assumptions. The big one was we knew what this red area was. And so on this map, when you look at it, when you see red, that means you're going to have tighter, more compacted soils. When you see green, you're going to have more mellow soils. And so on this map, we saw that we had a big red area, but we were able to know what that was because that's our entryway into the field. That's where we're pulling in grain trucks during harvest season, loading them up and sending them out. So we knew that area was compacted. What we did not know is the variability across the field. If you look from east to west on that field, you can see a distinct change as you start heading towards the west end of the field. That variability we were never adjusting before. We could see it. And that's why being able to see something is so important. Now the next step, of course, is understanding it. What is it telling you? And so when I look at this, especially in relation to downforce, because we're talking about soils here, we're talking about what's required of our planter. When I think about downforce, I think about really two areas that we need to be told what's going on, and that's our furrow and on our planter. And so what I want to do is I want to introduce Corey Mulbauer. He's our agronomy lead on the R&D side, and he's going to take you and show you what that furrow can tell us so we can understand what decisions we need to make based upon that.
Thanks, Caleb. I'm going to talk to you guys about furrow structural integrity and its relationship to the downforce target setting that you choose on your planter. We had a lot of beautiful weather this fall, and it gave us an opportunity to spend an extra amount of time out in the field. I took that chance to do some open furrow examples of how that relationship of downforce and furrow quality interact. Notice the planter in the picture. We've got the closing wheels tied up on most of the rows, so we're going to take this opportunity to look at the seed furrows that we've developed here. Furrow structural integrity, what I mean by that is the goal of a good seed furrow is to have a clean, open, and consistent environment for each and every seed. What we want is equal moisture, equal temperature, and good, consistent soil density for all the seeds so that we achieve that uniform germination and emergence that we strive for optimum yield potential. Here's an example of downforce target setting too heavy for these conditions. The first thing you notice is on the surface of the ground, there's a very pronounced gauge wheel footprint that we can visually see there. That's your first indication that the gauge wheels are carrying quite a bit of weight. The average gauge wheel weight for this pass was 300 pounds on the gauge wheels. But yet look inside the furrow. The good thing about carrying this amount of weight is we're achieving a very clean, open seed furrow environment. So I know I'm going to have good, consistent environment for each and every seed in that furrow. The problem with carrying this much weight is when you use your digging tool and you pick along the sides of the seed furrow, you can feel how dense and compact that soil is. Carrying 300 pounds of gauge wheel weight is a lot of weight for a lot of soil environments. Like here, we've created quite a bit of compaction, and this is going to be a problem with our closing system and its ability to put this soil back together and have a good environment for seeds to grow in and root development later on. Here's an example of downforce target too light for the planting conditions. What do you notice is different here? The furrow is 3/4 of the way shut already. What happened is, with no closing systems engaged, the furrow actually collapsed in on itself. Because our down pressure is only about 30 pounds of weight carried on the gauge wheels, that left this furrow environment too loose. And we lost the integrity of the sidewalls and they caved in. And what caves in around that seed is dry soil and clods, and that creates an inconsistent environment for germination and emergence, and we're not going to achieve the uniform moisture and temperature that we strive for to get that optimum stand. When you dig around in that soil, you can just feel how loose it is, and it's just another way to tell. The gauge wheel imprint is non-existent. Like in the heavier setting where we could see right where the tire ran, when your gauge wheels are too light, you'll struggle to find their imprint on the surface of the ground. In this example, we've got the downforce target set just right for the conditions. We're carrying about 100 pounds on the gauge wheels, and that happens to be about the optimum range to be in for this type of planting environment. We're achieving that good, clean, open furrow environment where we can achieve consistency seed to seed when it comes to moisture and temperature and soil density. You can see the gauge wheel imprint, which we want to see a little bit, just not overpronounced. So seeing the gauge wheel imprint is a good thing, meaning that we are carrying a little bit of weight on the gauge wheel tires. When we dig alongside this furrow, our digging tool easily pokes into the ground. We can see movement of the soil as we poke at it. We go inside the furrow and do a little bit of lifting, and you can see it crumble and fall apart. This is a good sign. You can have confidence if this is the open furrow environment you're seeing that your closing system is going to be able to do a good job of closing this seed furrow, achieving good density around the seed, having good emergence and good root development later on. So let's remember, as you're setting your downforce target, you want to think about, are you choosing the optimum gauge wheel weight for the planting conditions that you're in? You want to achieve good furrow structural integrity, meaning a clean, open, and consistent seed environment in your planting conditions. You can use your downforce target as a tool. If planting conditions get drier, it's going to be harder to hold that sidewall, so you probably need to have a higher down pressure target. And that's okay because compaction is not a risk in dry conditions. When you get into wetter planting conditions, you probably need to choose a lower downforce target because now compaction is a high risk problem and it's going to be easy to hold an open furrow sidewall in a wetter condition. So now you know you can use your downforce target setting to help control your furrow structural integrity. You use it to make sure that you get an optimum seed furrow environment for best germination and emergence uniformity for the planting conditions that you have. Caleb?
Thanks, Corey. And thank you for giving us an up-close view of the furrow and allow it to help us understand what's going on in our field. So as I mentioned, there's really two areas that we want to understand. One was the furrow, the other was our planter. What's our planter telling us? And so as we know, when you look at the row unit, you have these red arrows, right? This is the pressure coming up from the ground. And our row unit also has weight tied to it. So you have weight on top that are the green arrows coming down. And so as Corey walked through, we want to be able to manage those in order for us to have good structural integrity of the furrow. And so the main goal is to have sidewall firming force, but there's also areas that we can manage as well to where we have good ground contact and we carry enough margin of weight to make sure we're firming that sidewall, but we're not compacting it, right? So there's really some key things that we can do in order to understand the planter more. And by having the visibility and the insight on the planter by using the simple tool that Doug was talking about, the load pin, that gives us a good indication and allows us to understand what's happening more, right? Now we have two metrics that we really want to manage. We want to manage ground contact and margin. Those are the two that we want to understand. What do they mean and how do we impact them when we want to make a decision? And so I thought about this. What's the best way for us to illustrate ground contact and margin? What's the best way to make an example of that? And I thought about it, and it's all about weight, right? We're dealing with weight here. We want to have enough weight to resist the amount of weight required that the ground is pushing up against that row unit. And so what I decided was I'm going to do something that's probably not very wise, but I'm going to step on a scale here at Winter Conference so we can get a baseline of weight. So I'm going to grab this scale back here. I'm going to set it on the ground. I'm going to take a step on it and I'm about 250 pounds. It's a little bit heavier than I thought, but that's probably because I taste tested every casserole that came in front of me over the holiday season. But that's all right. So I'm going to act as the row unit, right? I'm going to be 250 pounds. I'm the green arrows going down. And so I thought about, well, now I need some red arrows. I need a force to go up against. And so I decided that I'm going to pick an NFL player, and I'm going to pick Andrew Wiley. Andrew Wiley is the Kansas City offensive guard. That man stands 6'6", and he's 309 pounds. He's a big boy. Now, what I like to think is, what would it look like if I go up against Andrew Wiley? And you can tell I am not an NFL player, no matter how much I would like to be one on Monday mornings. But I think about that as well. When you take my 250 pounds and you go up against Andrew Wiley's 309 pounds, this is what I think would happen. And I don't think it's a poor representation. I think that I would be knocked into the air. And in this situation, when we don't have enough weight on our row unit versus Andrew Wiley's weight pushing up against it, we're going to do what that poor young man did when he ran up against that other guy. We're going to lose ground contact. We're going to go up in the air. And so what happens when we lose ground contact? Doug talked about it a little bit earlier. Corey dove into what our furrow looks like. When we lose ground contact, we run the risk of not hitting depth. When we lose ground contact, we also put our furrow in a situation where we're not able to firm the sidewalls. So now we have crumbling coming in. We're putting ourselves in the position to have yield limiting crop because we put it into a furrow where it wasn't at depth and we didn't firm the sidewalls, and so we could have uneven emergence, and that's going to hurt us. So then what do we need to do? What do we need to do in the situation where Andrew Wiley is 309 pounds and I'm 250? I need to add weight, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put on a weight vest, pick up some dumbbells. This is my workout equipment from home. As you can tell from my weigh-in, it hasn't been used much, but I'm going to throw this on so I can add weight. And that's essentially what we're doing when we have downforce on a planter. We're adding weight. So I pick these up. I now step back on that scale. And now I've added about 100 pounds. 350 is what my weigh-in is. So I have enough weight to go up against Andrew Wiley now, don't I? Yeah, I can make it through him because I've added this weight. And that's what we're doing when it comes to downforce. We're adding weight to the row unit. And so when we take a look at that, what does that look like now? 350 pounds versus 309. Now our map is telling us that we have good ground contact. Our furrow is telling us that we've got firm sidewalls, we're at depth, we're in a good spot. So ground contact is so important, but then there's that other element. We've added weight to make sure we get to depth. Now we need to understand margin, right? With margin, we're at 350 pounds. Andrew Wiley's at 309. That gives us about 41 pounds of margin. Now that margin is very important because that is the extra weight we're using to firm the sidewall. We want to have margin. Margin is good. And so now that's going to put us in a position where we have a really good furrow. And so now if you're thinking through it and you're saying, well, we want to have good ground contact, we want to have some margin, why don't I just always set my T-handle to the heaviest setting? And it goes back to that sweet spot that Doug was talking about. We want to manage that. Because what happens when I go up against these guys? And it's not Andrew Wiley anymore. I mean, I can even take this weight vest off, and if we go up against these Pee Wee Leaguers, I don't think they're going to stand a chance against me. Except maybe the one in the middle, he's got the eyes of a warrior. But they're going to struggle, right? If I'm the row unit and they're underneath me, I'm going to flatten them. I'm going to compress them. I'm going to compact them. So now that I have 130 pounds of margin, I know I have too much margin. And I'm going to end up hurting the sidewalls, and I'm going to end up hurting the root development of my crop. And so we get told that, we can understand that now because we know we have too high of margin. We're seeing it in our furrow when we go in and we dig and we're not able to fracture that sidewall as easily. We're able to be told that because of the technology that we have when we have the eyes on the planter. But we're in a situation where we could be causing poor root development. And so this actually hits really close to home. I want to take you back out to Berkmeyer Farms. Now it looks like this map has changed, right? The colors are all different. But I'll tell you, this is the same map that I showed at the beginning of the presentation. The scale hasn't changed. What's changed is the year. So that map was 2020 that I showed at the beginning. This is 2019. What happened in 2019? It was a wet year, wasn't it? It was really wet. We were planting this on June 3rd because it was wet. So now you look at that picture and you say, well, there's now purples, there's lighter greens. That's changing how much we require of the soil, or the soil requires of us to put weight down on, right? Now what we're seeing is, instead of having those reds where we had really tight soil, now we brought in purples. That's soil that's very easily compacted when you put weight on it. It doesn't require as much weight. And so when you put those two pictures up side by side, you can identify a couple of things. Number one, as I mentioned earlier, the colors have changed, but the variation, the variability within the field going from east to west is still there. We still had to have variation in how we managed our downforce, because even though in 2020 where we required a lot more weight and they were tighter soils, in 2019 we still required weight on that west side of the field. So we were lucky enough and we're thankful that we run Delta Force on our operation, because it's been a huge benefit to us, because we have a hydraulic system that has row by row downforce, and we have the insight to what's happening in our field. You can tell by this scale. Like I said, the scale is the same for both maps. In 2020, we were applying 400, 450 plus on our row units. In 2019, we were actually taking weight off of our row units. So if you put that into example that I talked about with the weight vest, in 2020, I was putting on a weight vest, I was picking up dumbbells. In 2019, I was trying to do the Atkins diet. We had to take weight off, or else we wouldn't have been successful, because we were going to compact the soil. And we were able to make that decision in the field because of what we saw, what we understood, and we had the tools to manage it. And so I wanted to kind of show what we used to do in our operation. So I have a side-by-side here of two row units. The row unit on the left is running springs for a downforce. The row unit on the right is running Delta Force for downforce. Now, as you can tell, as it moves through the field, if you're sitting in the tractor cab, you can look back and you can see some movement, but you're not seeing a whole lot of difference. But when we get the insight on that planter, when we understand what's happening by using those tools, those simple technologies to see and have the planter tell us what we need to do as far as making a decision, you can see that we're carrying a lot of margin on the row unit with springs. And for us, we didn't know about that until we started seeing it, right? My dad would say 3 and go. You put that to notch 3 and you go. Well, as we saw the variation in our field from east to west, that wasn't going to work. And the variation from 2019 to 2020, that wasn't going to work. And so we wanted to learn how to manage it, right? And so that's the next step. We can see it. We now understand what downforce is telling us through ground contact and margin. Now we want to manage it. And I think about this. I think about our operations and how we have managed things in the past. And I think about how we manage things today as well. And one of the things that really popped into my mind is we're making management decisions in the cab using simple technologies today in harvesting. For those of you that see that picture up there and can relate to it, you know that that's a grain loss monitor. And it's telling us whether we have rotor loss or shoe loss. And because of that simple sensor telling us, hey, you've got rotor loss, you can make a management decision when it matters the most, which is in the field, and you can adjust for that variability. If I see rotor loss, what I do at that point is I'm going to increase my rotor speed. I may pinch down my concave. I know I have decisions that I can make. If it's my shoe, I'm going to open up that chaffer, I'm going to slow down that fan speed. I've got opportunities to make decisions that are going to make me more successful, not next year, but when I'm going through the field when it matters the most. And so for us on our operation, using Delta Force has given us that same luxury. We're able to make those decisions because of the monitor and what it's telling us. When I highlight that box, that's our Delta Force box. That's our downforce box. It's telling us what our ground contact is, what our margin is. And we can make the simple, easy decisions, now that we have seen it and understand it, to make an impact. So I want to walk you through a couple of examples. And I'm going to show that we're sitting at a standard setting on our downforce control for our Delta Force control page. And as we're looking at that standard setting, we want to see what's going on in our field, and we want to see what the monitor is telling us. So the example I have up on the screen right now shows us that we're having sidewalls that are crumbling in. On the map, it's showing us that we don't have good ground contact. The item that says ground contact says we're at 68%. So if we think about that, we have 3 indicators that say, hey, you've got something going on, and now that we understand ground contact, we know we need to add weight, right? So when I go to the Delta Force control page, it's very simple. I click the Delta Force control page. I'm now at standard. I know I need to add weight in order to have good ground contact. I click over to heavy and I increase my target to 150 pounds. I can see if my ground contact improves. I can make sure I'm not compacting the sidewall. And I've just made a change that's going to benefit my operation very quickly while I'm in the cab when it matters the most, right? So what about the flip side? What happens when we're carrying too much margin, where we see the compaction? Similar process. What we're going to do at that point is we're just going to go ahead and go into that Delta Force screen again. We're running at 100 pounds of target. We hit over to light and we've just decreased it. We just made a management decision again that's going to help our operation because we're not carrying excessive margin and we're not compacting our furrow. You can also have the ability to use custom. That means you can play within the preset settings to make sure that you are able to hit that target you want. So you can actually just use the slider and it will take it to the target that is going to best suit your conditions and in your fields. And so this is what I think about often is we make these decisions all the time when we're in our harvesting equipment and throughout our operation. And as I said, when we're harvesting, that's our second most important pass of the year. For us on our operation, Delta Force has been a huge benefit because we're able to make those same changes that have a bigger impact in our most important pass of the year. Now, I appreciate your time today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of Winter Conference. Thank you.